Good afternoon. I'm Alexandra Klitina, journalist with Kyiv Post. Today with us, Peter Shmigel. He is Australian journalist that currently visiting Ukraine. Good afternoon.
Hi, Alexandra. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Nice to be here at the Kyiv Post.
I just would like to ask you, are you visiting only Kyiv or are you traveling around? And what is your opinion, impression about Ukraine and our people's struggle against Russian invasion?
I'm a regular visitor to Ukraine. I think I've made 20, 30 trips. I don't know how many over many years. And so I try to get around the country as much as I can. I've been to Kyiv 1 or 2 days after its liberation a month or so ago, and I'm back this time. I'll be in Kyiv. I'll be traveling to Kharkiv. I'll be traveling to other places. Yesterday, for example, I traveled to the northern and western suburbs of Kyiv, to Makariv, Vorzel, Bucha, Irpin. And the reason I went there is I went with a former assistant minister for health, Pavlo Kovtynuk, to look at medical facilities that have been intentionally destroyed by the Russian Federation. Yes, I'll be traveling around the country, trying to look at perhaps some of the as yet untold stories about the Russian invasion and occupation, such as the targeting of medical facilities, which is part of a war not against Ukraine, but a part of a war against Ukrainians. It's an attempt to terrorize and to kill people. That's simple.
What is your opinion? What is the reason for Ukrainian bravery?
Yeah, and you see it everywhere. So even yesterday, I was talking to the maintenance man, Hospodar, the facility that we were visiting in Makariv. 65-year-old man, his wife had worked at the facility for 43 years in the kitchen, and he was talking about how his dog Dina would hear the drones and hear the rockets before they would, and they would then hide appropriately. He was talking about looking at the aggressor through binoculars 200 meters away and then directing the staff at the hospital about to take safety or not to take safety. And he explained this all to me in a very matter-of-fact way, and he was very optimistic about the future, that there will be a rebuilding of the hospital, that there will be a rebuilding of Ukraine. I go, wow, this is extraordinary bravery. This is resilience from a regular person like you don't see in the West. And I think the reason for that is that Ukrainians have a very specific psychology when it comes to war. They have known war, they have known tragedy, they have known the Holodomor, they have known the repression of the Soviet era. And all of that tragedy has in some ways psychologically made them tougher for what they're going through now. There's a theory that they have PTS, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and that post-traumatic stress syndrome, one of the things it makes you do is look at risk all the time. You're scanning, saying, where's the risk, where's the risk? It's a perfect skill for war because you're constantly looking at the risk, you're assessing it, and you're saying, no, I can actually face that risk. I can actually do something about it. I don't have to be a victim. It's extraordinary for me that in some ways Ukrainians are braver than anyone else in the world. It's not an accident. It's because they're prepared by their history to be braver than everybody else.
Interesting opinion. You are living in Australia. Tell us, what is Australian people are thinking about Russia's war in Ukraine?
I'm very fortunate because not only have I lived in Australia for the last 32 years, I've had a chance to work in the Australian government, so I can comment not just from the point of view of Australian society, but from what I imagine is the way that the government is thinking about Australia. And I'm very proud. The Australian government has probably allocated more than $100 million towards Ukraine's defense up until now. And if you think about it, that's a very small country. It's 23 million people. So if you did the statistics, you could probably say that Australia per capita has probably donated almost as much as anyone else, probably more. And that includes, for example, these vehicles called Aussie Bushmasters, which is a defensive vehicle, an armored personnel carrier considered one of the best in the world. And it's donated, for example, a battery of howitzers, which I hope will arrive soon in the country and take part in the defense in the East. So, all of that shows you that not only is the government committed, but because it's a democracy, the community is very strongly behind Ukraine as well. For example, the peak Ukrainian organization in Australia, SUA, has raised, I think, $3 million from the Australian community now for humanitarian programs. That's amazing, the degree of support that Australians will put into this. Let's not forget that Australians and Ukrainians are very close for a very tragic reason called MH17. And 40 Australians lost their lives to Vladimir Putin. And they see this partially as a war for justice for those Australians who died from Vladimir Putin's aggression.
What could you tell about effectiveness of sanctions that the Western countries imposed on Russian economy and Russian officials?
Yeah, your readers will be able to read an interview that I just did for Kiev Post with Alexei Makayev, who is Ukraine's Minister for Sanctions. He's the man, the diplomat from Ukraine who has to negotiate with the EU and the G7 and the Americans and the Canadians about what kind of sanctions and how. And he is the expert, and he is the person who is best placed to comment. And what Alexei said to me is that he thinks the sanctions are having a very strong impact, that Russia is about to default financially in terms of its loans and the banking system internationally, that it's struggling to resupply its own military. But there is also further to go, he said, and that the real pain will come once we start talking about fossil fuel. It's energy that funds 66% of the Russian economy. And the West needs to ask itself a really hard question, and that's what's worth more to it. Is it worth having nice warm homes, or is it worth Ukrainian lives? That's what it comes down to. When the West is buying Russian gas, it's allowing Vladimir Putin to kill Ukrainians. If we get rid of the energy supply, we save Ukrainian lives, fundamentally. And the West needs to make that strong moral choice, gas or life.
Do you think full embargo will stop the war, or maybe it's something else needed?
Well, that's a really interesting question. The embargo right now looks like it's going to start with oil, and gas will come over time. So regrettably, it won't be instant. It will take time. And therefore, in terms of ending the war, it won't just come down to energy. Look, I think ultimately, what makes Ukraine a safe place and what makes Ukraine a place where Ukrainians can live at peace? It's the absolute defeat of Russia as we know it today. It's not just about defending Ukraine's borders and sovereignty. It's about defeating Russia as we know it today. Nazi Germany only changed. German mentality only changed when it was crushed and humiliated. That's just a historical fact. Germans had to reinvent themselves into a different and new mentality and different culture. And in some way, due to the zombie effect and due to cultural legacy and imperialism, Russians will need to go through that painful process themselves. It will be better for them in the end, and it will be better for Ukraine. But ultimately, the solution, peace, only comes from a total change in Russian mentality.
Hopefully it will be soon. So thank you for this interview. Have a nice day.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
Thanks
have a
a
nice
lot.
day.